night drives, sleepwalking, late night shifts, and the paranormal, all of which can offer some scary experiences. In today's video, we will be covering all of these topics. A massive thank you to the writers, whose links can be found in the description. Remember, you can send in your own story to rylhstories@gmail.com. If you enjoy the video, feel free to support it with a like and a comment letting me know your thoughts. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated. Enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. This happened to me shortly after I got my first car when I was around 18. Years later, it still shakes me to my core, and I avoid driving at night as much as possible because of it. I don't even like to talk about it, but I feel like it can serve as a warning for those other late night travelers. The car was a piece of crap four-door, one of those ones with squeaky brakes, roll-down windows, where you have to manually lock each door. It was summer and I was working at a mine. The mine was in a small town about a 5-hour drive from my hometown. During the work week, I stayed near the mine at my aunt's, but on my days off I drove home as the town was very small. This story happens one of the nights I was driving home. My shift ended around 8 p.m., and instead of waiting until the next day, I decided to push on and get home early. I open the back door and throw my work gear in, and I start my engine. I notice my gas is getting low, but figured I can make it about halfway at least, so I start driving. I am pretty tired, so I decide to blast some tunes and roll my window down for some summer air. My car doesn't have AC, which just adds to my fatigue, but I am excited to spend my hard-earned money at home with friends. 11 o'clock or so and the inevitable happens. I see the familiar bright glow of the low fuel light. I squint my tired eyes as I pull into the next gas station. I just want to be back on the road, so I hop out, swipe my card, and start to pump. I am finishing up and turning to put the nozzle back when I hear over the PA, "Ma'am, your credit card has been declined. Please come inside to pay." The voice startles me as I replace the nozzle. I look around and am suddenly all too aware that I am the only one around. No other people parked at the station, or even driving by on the country road. Reluctantly, I proceed towards the small building's entrance. I can see through the glass doors that the clerk is standing right next to them, which gives me a sinking feeling. He is a large bearded man, and I am a petite female. Still, I feel compelled to go in and finish paying. I mean, there are cameras everywhere, right? As soon as the door closes behind me, he shoves past me and locks the door with a set of keys. I almost cry when he says shakily to me, "Get behind the counter and crouch down. We need to call the cops." I can't even comprehend the words as he says them, and before I know it, he is leading me roughly by the arm behind the counter. He throws me down, grabs the phone, and squats next to me. He stares at me wide-eyed with a look of terror and states, "While you were filling your car, I saw a man over the CCTV crawl into your back seat." I immediately burst into tears, and he calls the cops. It felt like an eternity until they got there, and me and the clerk just sat there in silence, bewildered at the events that just took place. We both jumped as we heard knocking on the glass. We peered over the counter, and to our relief, it was the police. They told us they had the guy, and took both our statements. After it was all over, I assured them I just wanted to continue driving home, even though I was still hysterical. Before leaving me, the cop said something I will never be able to forget. "You're lucky the clerk was looking at his camera when he did. The guy who crawled into your back seat had a knife, and a backpack full of rope and duct tape. Be careful driving alone out there." Moral of the story, be careful driving alone. Be careful at night. Be careful stopping to pump gas. Always be aware of your surroundings. And always, always check your back seat. Growing up with a sleepwalker in the family gets old pretty fast. At first, everyone is a bit concerned that they'll hurt themselves or wander out of the house. These fears aren't unwarranted. The sleepwalker isn't aware of their actions, and everyone else is usually, well, asleep. We only discovered my little brother was an apparent sleepwalker when we kept waking up to all the doors and windows open in the morning. Since we live in a rural area, this wasn't too much of a danger, beyond potential wild animals roaming in. Still, as the older sibling, my parents designated me as the official keeper of my brother's actions. We shared a room, you see, and they wanted to use that to my advantage when it came to retrieving and sending my brother back to bed. The common saying of, "don't wake a sleepwalker," isn't as big a deal as you think. As long as you wake them gently and they're aware of their condition, they're not going to hurt themselves or be startled. Why would they be? They've just woken up after all. First, we tried bells on the door. When that failed to wake me up, my parents tried leaving plastic sheets on the floor. We tried just about everything you could possibly think of to try and alert me when he got up. And that was when my father came up with the idea of a string. Every night, my brother and I would tie a long string to our wrists and go to sleep like that. If he got up at any point, the tugging of him exiting the room woke me up pretty quickly. It was a harmless, noiseless, flawless plan that had me bringing my brother to bed long before he opened our home to the elements and animals outside. You get used to it. The string, the tugging, retrieving the sleepwalker, and putting them back to bed. Some nights he would get up more than once, and others he wouldn't sleepwalk at all. Either way, that was the only variance in an otherwise rigid routine we had. There was no spooky words out of his mouth during his sleep, no strange place he kept going back to, and no motive behind opening the doors and windows. When asked, my brother simply stated that his dream was unrelated, and he didn't know why he would open the home. This went on for the better part of a year, before finally dying down. We gradually stopped tying the strings to our arms, before sleep, because my brother stopped getting up. One night in late July, I remember going to bed a bit earlier than usual, after we took a trip down to the river for the day. Naturally, I was exhausted from an afternoon of paddling against the current, and running around the nearby park with other kids my age. At some point during the night I woke up, having become a very light sleeper thanks to my duty as watchful eye over my brother in the last year. I remembered feeling hot and sticky, thanks to the humid weather, getting up and opening the window, flipping the fan on, and hoping that some air circulation might help. But when I turned to go back to bed, I saw my door was cracked open about 2 inches wide. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I realized there was something else as well. A face. Just beyond the threshold of the door, a small, pale face was pressed up to the crack. One big brown eye staring in at me lazily. My fear turned to frustration in an instant, when I realized I was looking at my brother, who was standing completely still outside the door, and more than likely, sleepwalking again. With a deep breath, I gathered myself and grabbed the door handle. "Go back to bed. Can you just be normal for one night?" And when I slammed the door shut and returned to bed, it was mean, but I was getting tired of it, you know? After a long day, I just wanted to sleep. And if he was just going to stand out there all night, then it wasn't my problem. The next morning was nothing special. Mom made breakfast, and as we sat down at the table, I noticed my brother wasn't up yet. That was weird. He was always an early riser, and eager to greet the day. "I'm guessing Joe is sleeping in today?" I asked, idly picking and stabbing at my waffles. My dad set down his coffee and looked up from his paper. His brow crinkled in confusion. "Joe went to stay at Andy's house last night," he said. Then slowly his face softened again, and he chuckled. "You went to bed early, so you couldn't know." Suddenly I wasn't very hungry. My stomach flipped and my throat felt tight. "When did he go?" "Shortly after you went to bed, when we got back." I didn't tell my parents what I saw, worried that maybe something was now wrong with me. Instead, when my little brother came home later that day, I elected to reinstate the string system just as a precaution. Joe seemed confused, but was compliant, joking about how we're tied together forever. It was a strange comfort in a way. The string was reliable, predictable. And that it was. For the next few months, Joe and I both slept soundly with few sleepwalking incidents. I was thinking about dismissing the string again, but decided that just one more night wouldn't hurt either of us, just to make sure he wasn't getting up and wandering off. And it had become a source of a handful of inside jokes for us. Sibling bonding time, that kind of stuff. I think we both almost slept better when it was on as well. I woke up to a harsh tug on my arm quite suddenly. It was pitch black besides my alarm clock nearby, which read the time at 2:25 a.m. That wasn't the usual time Joe got up if he did sleepwalk, but variations could happen, and with a sigh I began to throw my covers off and slide out of bed. That was when the second hard yank on the string nearly sent me tumbling to the floor, and I found my anger welling up pretty quickly. I thought he must have gotten the stupid string caught on something and was trying to pry himself loose. So I collected myself and hurried towards the door that was already open. That was when I noticed something was wrong. The string was only long enough to keep us maybe 5 feet apart at the most, but this string was longer and pulled taut down the hallway and around the corner. "Joe?" I called quietly. This didn't feel right at all, but I made my way down the hall and turned the corner just in time for a third tug on the string. It was leading into the kitchen, which featured a door to the basement that was now wide open as well. The string was descending into it, and the tugging beyond it was growing more intense, impatient. This wasn't like Joe at all. He'd never gone in the basement before, let alone manually pull on the string. "Joe, are you awake? This isn't funny." I was louder this time, inching towards the open door as the string began to frantically vibrate and yank, and as if urging me farther. The closer I got, the more excited it grew, and when I reached the doorway, the next tug was so harsh that I almost lost my balance again. There was a lull in the tugging when I heard a door opening behind me, the bathroom across the hall from my room. A bleary-eyed Joe stepped out and blinked, one hand rubbing his eye as he yawned. There was no string on his wrist. Suddenly the string began to pull with a force stronger than before, making me stagger out onto the first step leading into the basement with a yell. Joe seemed to realize that I had the string on my wrist, and he didn't, and that whomever or whatever was in the basement was not him. There was a roar of noise, a low moaning from the darkness of the basement, and my little brother's frantic footfalls behind me, as he ran his way over and grabbed my free arm to hold me while he scrambled for something to cut the string. I heard the kitchen drawers crashing open as he searched, and then he produced a knife. One shaky hand sawing at the string, as the noise in the basement became so loud, it seemed to reverberate through our bones. And then the tugging stopped, the string snapped away, and both Joe and I fell backwards, sprawling over the kitchen floor. The noise ceased when the string was cut, and the basement door wobbled violently before slamming shut in our faces. Going to sleep after that was impossible, so Joe and I huddled up on my bed and sat with every possible light on in our room until the sun rose and our parents got up. Naturally, they didn't believe us, saying they hadn't heard a thing and slept soundly. They said we must have hallucinated together, or both been sleepwalking even. Either way, I know that whatever was in our basement was not my brother, and I refused to tie the string to my wrist ever again. Walmart is a godsend, depending on who you are. It was for me, at first. I live in a small town, smaller than most. Only about 4 businesses regularly hire near my house. And even then, family friends of owners and managers get first grabs. Luckily though, about half an hour away is another town, slightly larger, with just enough residents to have a more commercial district. It was always my favorite place as a child. Flashing lights, constantly changing. Something to do at all hours of the night. Of course, when I needed to find work, it was here that I applied. Plenty of jobs to go around, especially for someone young and able-bodied. Most jobs required manual labor, and I was happy to provide. When I got the response from Walmart, I was excited. They're a good store chain, in the end. Crucify me if you want, but God only knows I could use the cheap food and merchandise with my budget and living conditions. To get paid by them would be beauty itself. To get paid by anybody would, really. I showed up to work early on the first scheduled day, got my uniform, and was shown the ropes. I've always been someone to pay attention to what I'm doing, and do my best, no matter the job. This got me swiftly and irrevocably put on the night shift, to clean. I didn't mind really, I was a night owl anyway, and it gave me a reason to sleep away social obligations. Time went on, money started to be noticeable in my savings, and I was relatively happy. As I grew into a more secure and trusted position, my work ethic never wavered. I figured there was no harm in doing my best, and I'd likely get a hell of a recommendation for whatever job I pursued after this. Eventually, the closing shifts were left completely to me. We closed at about 12 a.m. every night, give or take for how many customers had to be shepherded through the final 2 registers, and however many self-checkouts and out the front door. The routine was simple. I finished cleaning the store while the cashiers and shift manager packed up their stations, and it was up to me to make sure all doors were locked after I finished my job, and put my supplies away. The first few times they reminded me that the store cameras were operational and recording 24/7. But I never intended to steal, even if some crime craving hit me. There was no point. I was a hermit after all. Anything I wanted to steal would be much bigger than I could possibly lug out. The night went like any other. The last of the customers finished their late night shopping at about 12:24, much to the hatred of the cashiers. I was behind on my cleaning because some family of farmers had dragged their mud-towing children to the store at midnight sharp, and I had to rework a few aisles. Nothing serious, and I figured it was just a bit more time before I got to recluse into the digital world. Besides, the floor scrubber was my favorite machine to use. I named it Sonic, for ironic reasons, and he was my trusted companion. The last of the cashiers left, with a wave and a smile. A cute woman, just a bit older than me. Her name was Teresa, if I recalled, and I had never gotten past the friendly small talk with her. Not that anything more could be pursued on shift, that is. I kept telling myself to ask for her number, but had yet to break the veil of courage that was the first step. My cleaning was just about done, and everybody had checked out. The lights had gone into their nighttime settings, half of them turned off, leaving everything dimmer. We never turned all the lights off, so that the cameras could properly view anyone desperate enough to break in. I was just getting ready to drive Sonic back to his storage room when I heard a strange noise. It was the sound of footsteps. Calm, rhythmic footsteps, echoing just barely off the linoleum floor. My first assumption was simple. The shift manager had stayed late. I hadn't seen him leave after all. And he did have a bit of a habit of putting off some paperwork until last minute. So I continued on my route, and decided to make some friendly small talk with him as I closed up the store. He was nice enough, and I'd heard through the drama vine of my coworkers that he'd gone through a divorce recently. Poor guy. I was walking down the main aisle, the large open lane that crowned the registers to follow the longer lines, and less clogging. This is when I heard the next sound. It was very distinct, easy enough to remember. The sound of some heavy packaging hitting the floor, coming from somewhere to my left. When I looked, I saw 2 things. A box containing a fan laying in the middle of an open aisle, and the flicker of movement signifying something moving quickly out of my field of view. Now, there are a few things to consider when you look at my next course of action. I did think of calling the police, however I thought immediately I knew what was going on. While I didn't see everyone that came and left, people tended to warn each other or gossip about interesting or scary people that entered the store in passing, and I'd heard none of that. So I came to what I felt was the most rational conclusion. Some teenager or homeless person had crept into the store with the intention of staying the night. This had happened before, mostly with the teenagers, not many homeless people in my community, for one reason or another, but kids always want to do the stupidest things they can, with the highest chance of success. It was a rational, quick explanation that gave me everything I needed. The next problem was the fact I didn't want to ruin some kid's life. I knew that just being taken into a police station wasn't a death sentence, but could deny scholarships for universities, and potentially some stricter jobs. I'd seen it happen before, even to people I knew. I didn't know if this kid had any big plans, but I didn't want to ruin them just because some stupid teenagers are stupid teenagers. I considered all of these things within a few moments, and decided to talk to the kid. I'd coax him out, threaten to call the police if I had to, and save the actual call as a last resort. A safe enough conclusion. I walked about halfway down the aisle where I'd seen them disappear. Taking a deep breath, I called out in the least threatening voice I could muster. "Hey kid, I saw you. I heard you. Come on out." Silence. I kept walking, eventually reaching the fan. Must have knocked it down attempting to hide. I replaced it. "Come on, kid. Don't make this harder on either of us. The manager probably already clocked me out. I'm not getting paid for this." It wasn't my best joke, but the lack of even a snicker kind of hurt my feelings. I sighed, rubbing my head. I could look around and try to find them, but I doubted it'd get me anywhere. I wasn't exactly fit, and while my job kept my endurance decent, I was tired. "Listen, kid, I'm gonna pack equipment. If you don't come out by the time I get to the front door, I'm calling the police. There's cameras everywhere. You'll get in big trouble." Satisfied with the threat, I turned and began heading back. Down the aisle, standing in front of my beloved Sonic, was the kid. Now I couldn't tell you what was wrong. It was the feeling you get in your chest late at night, listening to the small sounds of your room, when you just get done binging horror stories for half an hour. Something about the dimness of the lights, not letting me clearly see exactly how this kid looked. The hour of the night. And the fact that we were the only two people in this whole store nearly squeezed the breath right out of my lungs. I tried really hard not to panic. I managed. "That's the floor scrubber," I called over to the kid, taking a half-stuttered step forward. No response, but their head turned towards me. My vision isn't pristine. I don't wear glasses to a job for cleaning, as they get stains, and the lights were dim. But God, I knew something wasn't right. I couldn't make anything out. No gender, no age. They were on the short side, maybe younger, a child abandoned, a homeless kid. The thought should have been sad. But as I soldiered on with my approach, all I could think of was the fact that they stood between me and the exit doors. "Can you hear me?" I asked. No response. Nothing. I was closer now, about halfway down the aisle. My feet felt heavier, the air felt still. I couldn't even hear the buzzing of the lights overhead. I was set now. What would I do? Run from a random child vagrant? But every step felt like I was sinking, and my body felt heavy. My senses told me to run, no matter how much I rationalized. Details were getting clearer as I got closer. Blurred colors of blue jeans and a red shirt grew into crisper outlines. Short brown hair, sneakers. Normal things completely. My heart calmed a bit. For whatever reason, I noticed. The kid was wearing long, black gloves that slid underneath their shirts. I could just barely see the pale outline of their face beneath their hair. It really was just a kid. "Hey," I said, just a few feet away now. "Are you lost, kid? Your parents might be outside. You shouldn't wander off." I tried to sound as comforting as possible. My heart was still pounding against my chest. My body was still tense. But it was just a kid. A small kid. They looked up at me. Neither the police nor the employers believed me. Looking at the footage of a man having a mental breakdown randomly in the middle of an empty Walmart, I understand why. I wouldn't believe me either. My managers took me quitting short notice relatively well. They even said they'd still give me flying colors as a reference for future applications, assuming I could give them proof that I was going to regular therapy and a psychiatrist. My old coworkers give me half smiles when I see them on the streets, in a store, or whatever else. I'm sure some version of what happened crawled down the vine and humored them. I never stepped foot near that Walmart again. I couldn't. But sometimes late at night, when I'm driving or watching YouTube, I see something. A shadow of a shadow. A vague shape amongst the darkness. Too far away to see clearly, too close to ignore. Every time I know. And no matter how many times I try to ignore it, no matter how much I try to avoid it, I feel it. Every time, it gets closer on its own. My whole life I've been a little different from most people. It's a running theory that I am a reincarnation of my great-granny. From the age that I first started talking to around 4 years old, I would tell my mom stories from when I babysat her, or I would tell my nana things that only my great-granny could have known. It was around that age that I started to see ghosts. I would tell everyone in my family about the ghosts I would see, that would just follow me about my day-to-day life, and leave after a while. When I was 4, my other great-grandma died, and since that day, she's watched over me. I can feel her presence, and sometimes I've been lucky enough to see her. Up until a couple of years ago, every encounter I had with the supernatural has been innocent and harmless. I even felt protected. The first time that things got violent was on Halloween, a couple of years ago. I think I must have been about 12 or 13 at the time. I'd been left home alone while my family went out trick-or-treating. From the moment they left, I could feel a presence, though this one wasn't protective. I could feel the anger radiating through the entire building. I'd been lying on my bed most of the nights, most of my body hidden behind a wall. The moment that I sat up, a shoe that had been sitting by my door flew at my head. I ducked just in time to see it hit the window beside me, with a thud echoing through my room. When my family got back, they gave me a bag of sweets, which I took up to my room before going back downstairs. Only a few minutes passed before there was a thud from my room. The bag had been thrown across the room, and right by the door was a horrible smell. It was a mix of rot and burning rubber. From then on, the ghost would sit on my table and watch me as I slept. At first, it was unsettling, and hard to fall asleep being able to feel the hatred coming from it, but eventually I grew used to it. When I finally saw him fully, I was terrified. He was torn up, light blue jeans and a red striped shirt. His face was rough, and his graying hair hung over his face. I was getting ready for school when I saw him in the mirror that first time. I was brushing my hair and saw him come up behind me and rest his head on my shoulder with a creepy smile that showed his rotting teeth. He stayed with me for years, and even now he'll still appear every now and then. The next one I'm going to talk about is the reason for me putting off posting this for so long. I'd been downstairs with my family talking about everything I just wrote about, and we were joking about it. That's when I started feeling the presence again. When I went back to my room, the light blew as soon as I entered. I went to get another light bulb, and joked that the ghost had blown the lights, because I had made fun of it. When I went back to my room and turned on the new light bulb, I felt a pain in my pinky finger. I seen a cut the length of my entire finger open up, and when that stopped, the light blew again. For the next year I had learned my lesson about talking about the ghosts, until one night I decided to make another joke. It had been about 3 months since I last felt or saw any kind of being, and thought that it would be funny to taunt them. Immediately my light bulb blew once again, and there were no other light bulbs that I could use. I opened my door to see the light from the hall into my room. Big mistake. That was the first time I saw her. A young girl who couldn't have been more than 6 years old stood in my room. She was dressed in a plain white dress, with a white bow tied around her head. I'm here. It wasn't a threat, she was just letting me know about her presence. After all, I had asked if she had left me. Her voice told me that she was younger than I thought. She sounded completely innocent and childish. Not the creepy horror movie childish, though. Then she said my name and told me she was there again. I can't remember now what she said next, but she had just kept repeating the same question over and over until my stepdad came upstairs and she disappeared. Since then, I've not really experienced much activity, and I'm not sure that's a good thing. I can't remember where in this timeline my encounters with shadow people were, so I'll just add them in the now. All of them happened at my aunt's house, so at least I know that they aren't following me specifically like the others. The first time I had been staying in the guest room, and woke up to one standing in the corner of the room. It was taller than the room itself, and it was hunched over at the ceiling. I couldn't move, as I watched it stare through me until I fell asleep. Not even 5 minutes later and I woke up again. This time it was in the corner to my left and it started sprinting. I can't even try to explain what it felt like, as the thing ran right through me and out of the room. I didn't sleep much after that. After that incident, I told my aunt while my little cousin was in the room, and he froze up entirely and asked me about it. "Did you see the tall man?" He was 6 years old at the time, so I understood that by tall he meant the shadow person. My aunt immediately tried to stop us from speaking. She said she didn't want my cousin freaking out, but it was already too late. He was terrified and shaking as he spoke. I went to the toilet when it was really late at night, and he was waiting outside my bathroom door. He put his hands around my neck and started squeezing and squeezing, and I couldn't breathe. I was trying to scream, but I couldn't, and then my dad came out to go to the toilet and he just disappeared. That's when my aunt sent him out of the room, and said one last thing to me before she refused to talk about it again. We found him laying on the ground screaming and crying, and he was holding his throat like he was trying to get his breath back. The last time I saw a shadow person was November 5th of 2016. It was a bonfire night, and I was terrified of fireworks. So I opted to stay in the house and look after my 2-month-old cousin, while everyone else was out setting off fireworks. I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, and looked out into the hall. There it was, walking around the empty hall. It turned to look back at me before walking into my aunt's bedroom. I hope that posting this isn't going to make the little girl mad again. If anything else happens, I'll post another part. But for now, this is all the things I can think of that I have experienced.